In Area 19, we have the Den of Death. When your players look around here, they'll be able to see a whole bunch of bones scattered all around. And what's really cool here is there is slippery ice here. If a combat ensues, whether they go up against Kobold Vampire Spawn or they go up against Tekeli Lee in here, then at the start of everyone's turn, everyone has to make a acrobatics check or fall prone, which is pretty scary, honestly, if you're going up against people in combat because, that could mean that your movement is reduced. And that could mean that your positioning is all wrong because if you fall prone, then standing up takes a whole half of your movement. Area 20, the Ice Crypt. This is where Tekeli Lee was before your players inadvertently released him. And what's really cool here is that the Kobold Vampire Spawn actually set up a whole bunch of skulls because they were sort of worshipping Tekeli Lee. You should definitely leave some hint here that Tekeli Lee was definitely in this location. Maybe have some mats of fur and, maybe put some paw prints all around. And you should totally make it look like it was recently broken. And basically telling your players that Tekeli Lee just got released from here, but without actually telling them. In Area 21, we have the Frozen Frost Giant. So when the Ytheryn city crashed into the Ragged Glacier, Vlagomir, the giant, died and is basically just frozen in here. What's really funny is the Kobold Vampire Spawn tried clawing their way through the ice to get to the corpse so that they could eat it. But unfortunately for them, it is encased in 2 feet of ice and they haven't bothered trying to break through all that. Now, of course, if your players see a corpse frozen and with only 2 feet of ice, you're probably going to have some people saying, oh, there's got to be some awesome loot on that guy. Let's go ahead and open it up. In which case, they will sadly be wasting their time because Vlagomir's real treasure is located further on in this dungeon. But I would go ahead and say if you have players spending both time and resources getting to this area, maybe go ahead and just have something on the Frost Giant's corpse. Maybe say he had some gold worth of items on him. Maybe go ahead and give your players a bone. Literally a bone. Maybe that like there's a Frost Giant bone sticking out. Give them something at least. Area 22, we have the Borehole. And once again, this is just another connector area. But most important of all is another Remorhaz hole here. And if your players go ahead and slide all the way down, they will find themselves in the Remorhaz Nest, Area 23. Area 23, the Remorhaz Nest. Whether your players accidentally come down here or purposely come down here, they'll be rewarded with a very strange sight. They'll be able to see that this place is actually well heated. There is steam coming out of here. And why is that? Because Remorhazes have heated bodies, and while they are residing within the water, they make the water nice and warm. Here's the thing though, Remorhazes are incredibly terrifying. So yeah, this is what we're looking at here. They'll be able to see water that they'll be actually able to walk in and not freeze to death. But most important of all, they'll see Remorhazes and Remorhaz eggs, which it describes as, you should state it, looks like a giant snowball. But if your players see Remorhazes and see a spherical object, they already know it's an egg. So it states that when your players go ahead and slide down or they just march down these holes, then the Remorhazes are going to know because they have tremor sense. And this is terrifying. So young Remorhazes are actually incredibly deadly. As we can see here, on average, they do 26 points of damage in a single hit, but that is not also the terrifying part. The terrifying part is that a creature that touches the Remorhaz or hits it with a melee attack while within 5 feet of it automatically takes 2d6 points of fire damage. If you have a melee heavy party, yeah, they'll be able to go ahead and zerg this thing down and possibly kill it relatively soon, but presumably it's going to get at least one attack in. It's got a pretty decent sized health pool, but all of those people attacking this thing are just going to be hurting themselves. And that is just going to be draining resources and is terrifying. Also located in Area 23, your players will be able to find some Remorhaz eggs. And if they want to go ahead and destroy them, they can absolutely just beat them up. Absolutely no issue. It states here that the Remorhaz eggs won't hatch unless they are placed in a heated pool, and they'll go ahead and hatch after 4d6 days. However, if you have entrepreneurs in the party, it states here that an undamaged Remorhaz egg can be sold for 500 GP in Bryn Shander, which is awesome, but you have to take into consideration how the frick are they carrying this egg all the way here? And most important of all, they're probably not coming through here again, really. They're probably coming here to do all of the Ytheryn stuff, and we'll have to deal with the can of worms when they get there. And if you thought young Remorhaz was bad, then in Area 24, we have the Remorhaz Mother, and we can see why you normally don't see these things in 5th edition modules, because these things can wipe a party, absolutely no issue. And located in Area 24 isn't just the Remorhaz Mother, but there's also another kid which will go ahead and join in on the fight if its mother is in danger. So a regular Remorhaz does on average 50 points of damage with its bite attack, and it has a plus 11, so it's more than likely going to hit. And very important here, if a creature gets bitten, they are automatically grapple restrained by the creature, and that is going to tie in well with its second ability, Swallow. If a creature is already being bitten by the Remorhaz, on its next turn, it can go ahead and swallow. It makes a regular bite attack, which does the damage, and in addition to that, they also get swallowed. And at the start of the Remorhaz's turn, it will go ahead and deal 6d6 points of acid damage to someone. The thing is, though, is that more than likely they're not going to be conscious while this happens, because presumably, on average, they're going to take 100 points of damage when they get swallowed, and then they'll be taking all that acid damage. And that will obviously be feeding into them failing death saving throws, and that is a nightmare. In addition, these creatures' heated bodies deal 3d6 points of damage, so melee fighters are going to have a terrible time with this. They're going to be damaging themselves. Someone is probably going to get swallowed up by this thing, and you can see why this is a TPK waiting to happen. So a way you can try and make sure that your players don't run into the Remorhaz Nest willy-nilly is go ahead and describe how it's getting hotter and hotter as they get here. And hopefully they'll be a little bit more cautious as they go ahead and approach. In this area, we also get some information on a hole leading to the Underdark. There is this mile-long hole which goes all the way down to the Underdark, and as we'll get to in a moment here, this is where the Drow are coming from. But the thing is it states that this area is not in the scope of this adventure. So I would go ahead and say that if you don't want your players getting sidetracked, and if you don't want to have to come up with some stuff for the Underdark, go ahead and just say that a Remorhaz is blocking the path and your players don't want any part of that and don't decide to come down here. Simple as that. Make sure your players stay within the bounds of this campaign. Area 25 is an empty cave. Not much more to say other than go ahead and just have that fun psychic haunting, whatever. Area 26, we have the egg-shaped cave, and this is another area which your players can go ahead and either descend down into or scale up. Should they go ahead and descend down, they'll find themselves in Area 36, the Grove, which means that they're on the right track. Area 27, the West Observation Platform. So this area was obviously part of the Nethery City, but it is now being purposed as a Drow Outpost. Semi-recently, 3 Drow made their way through here, and are basically using this place as a midway point between going back to the Underdark and also going to the city of Ytheryn. And something I really love to see in little parts like this, we actually get some information on how the Drow are going to respond to attacks. They will go ahead and cast Fairy Fire on the party, and then go ahead and shoot with their hand crossbows. The mage is going to go ahead and use a cloud kill to try and get as many people. And if things go sour, he's going to go ahead and summon a shadow demon on the party. And he will go ahead and try and flee to the Underdark if things are going a little bit too south. In Area 28, we have the Drow Outpost, and it's here where we get more information on the Drow Mage in particular. Ysselbeck Delambra here is an individual who is just trying to do what Drow do and, climb through the ranks. He is trying to plunder Ytheryn for all of its wealth, and also trying to contact his matrion of his clan and saying, and hey, we need some more people down here. But unfortunately for him, reinforcements are not coming for quite some time. Being a Drow, he doesn't trust the surface dwellers too well, and he is, power hungry and is probably not going to interact with the party too much. But if you are a DM who loves throwing in some amazing roleplay in here, perhaps there's a deal to be worked out here. Maybe your players could run up and say, hey, we mean you no harm, let's go ahead and plunder the Lost City together. In which case, you could have a fun element of having some Drow on your side. Yes, these Drow are probably going to try and stab the players in the back whenever they get the chance, specifically if your players get a hold of some awesome item or whatever. But, just having that roleplay element in there could be a ton of fun. A really cool treasure to have here is inside the outpost, your players will be able to find that the place is warm. The reason for that is because Ysselbeck found a thermal cube. A thermal cube is a pretty simple item. It's a 3-inch cube that generates enough dry heat to keep the temperature within 15 feet of it 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees Celsius for my non-US people here. And it is a pretty awesome item in this campaign, really. It's definitely something that your players are definitely going to want to hold on to make sure that they don't freeze to death in the future to come. In addition to that, Ysselbeck has a pretty dope spell list here in his spell book, and if you have a wizard in the party, they can go ahead and take a gander at it. Or if you plan on selling this later, you can go ahead and adjust it accordingly. Area 29, the East Observation Platform. Your players, as they make their way through here, if they are perceptive enough, they'll spot ice piercers, which we have seen before in Aurel's Abode. These things are just piercers that do a little bit more cold damage. The Drow know they are here, and they presumably use it to their advantage, really, because they are being protected by them to some degree. And they're going to go ahead and avoid these things. But if your players are not too perceptive enough, then they are not going to be able to know these things are here and probably get into a funny little combat scenario where piercers are dropping on them all around. Area 30, Vlagomir's Spark. When your players make their way inside of here, they'll see a 25-foot long spear. They're going to know that this thing was clearly made for a giant. And of course, players are going to see a spear in this room and say, of course I'm going to go ahead and try and get it. Why wouldn't I? If your players succeed on a DC 23 athletics check, they can go ahead and pull this thing out of the ice. Now, a DC 23 athletics check seems pretty freaking hard to do, especially for a lot of people. But the first time a barbarian, a fighter, a monk, or a ranger touches the spear, they will begin to grow. The light will disperse, and your player, whoever touched this that was of the appropriate class, will begin to grow at a rate of 1 foot every hour. So right when you touch it, nothing really is going to happen, but you could go ahead and say like, oh yeah, you know, all of a sudden you jump a little bit, you know, you can notice a little bit of a difference, you know, it's sort of noticeable, but not really. But holy guacamole, after just a few hours, whoever is touching this is obviously going to know something's going on, but once they reach 9 feet tall, then they will get a strength of 19 automatically. And after that, their strength score will increase and increase until finally they reach a height of 21 feet tall, weigh 7,700 pounds, and most important of all here, have a strength of 23. So this is a ridiculously powerful effect here. Like, this is game changing, really. Whoever touches this thing is going to be massive. They're going to have a huge strength, and, you know, they're just going to be freaking huge. They're going to be 21 feet tall and weigh 7,700 pounds. Obviously, that sounds badass, but at the same time, you have to consider there is some mechanical implications with this. If you are too big, then you're going to have to be squeezing through a lot of areas. If you weigh a lot, then perhaps you're going to not be able to stand on certain locations, or else you're going to break the whole thing. There is certainly some things you have to consider with this. So mechanically, it doesn't tell us what happens to the character, but they are not going to be of a medium or small size, whichever they were. They will grow to a huge size, meaning that their token would take up a whopping 3x3 grid. Now, there is a reason why Wizards of the Coast hasn't released a large or larger sized race, because there is some weird mechanics involved with being larger, and they haven't quite worked out how those will work. So you yourself are going to have to sit down and think about how those are going to work. If they have an aura effect, where does the aura emanate from? If they are large, then of course, you know, what can and cannot they do? There's a lot of things you have to consider, and unfortunately it doesn't give us any guidance. Majority of these classes, thankfully, don't have any auras or any effects or anything, but some of them do, and some of them could be multi-classed. And for example, like a paladin has an aura. If you have a fighter paladin, then you have to consider where does the aura emanate out from and all that stuff. You know, you're gonna have to think about these things. In Area 31, we have the Thing in the Ice. This is straight up Call of Cthulhu here. This is straight up Mountains of Madness stuff. As your players look at a flat sheet of cloudy ice, they're going to be able to see something otherworldly. And they have no idea what it is, because you might not even know what it is. It's just some weird foreign entity. Any creature that comes within 20 feet of this wall of ice will become the target of a Dominate monster spell of a DC of 15. If anybody fails, they're going to just stand there and be probed mentally for a full hour. After that hour is done, they must make a DC 15 intelligence saving throw or take 8d10 points of psychic damage, and whether they save or fail, it doesn't matter. A creature that was subjected to the hour-long probing gains a random form of a long-term madness. Now, it is theoretically possible that every single one in your party who goes up to this thing falls under this effect, in which case everyone's going insane, and potentially a whole bunch of people are taking a bunch of damage. But of course, it's also very likely that not everyone fails. In which case, what do your players do if some of them succeed and some of them fail and aren't just standing around getting mentally probed? Well, whoever succeeded and is looking around can go ahead and maybe try and drag their friends away. They may try and go ahead and attack the ice. You should go ahead and decide how you are going to go ahead and handle those things. We don't get any information on if your players get dragged out of there, but we do get information on if your players attack the ice. After dealing 50 points of damage to the ice wall, then the creature is just going to run away, and all of the Dominate Monster effects are going to go away as well. Now, according to the Dominate Monster spell, if you drag people away, that's not going to solve the issue. So it's more than likely if, your players see this and they pull away, then they're probably going to go ahead and attack the ice. In which case, it's kind of redundant, because in the span of one whole hour, your players will definitely be able to do 50 points of damage to the ice. So if you want that madness to take hold, maybe instead of making it a full hour of being probed, you could go ahead and reduce it down to 1 minute. If you want it to be instantaneous, it could just be as instantaneous as that, and maybe your players think that this is going on for a tremendous amount of time, this weird mental probing, but in reality, it was only just a few seconds. That could be fun. But of course, the damage is not going to be fun for your players, because 8d10 points of psychic damage is a lot, and most important of all, everyone that failed is going to go insane. And some of the effects on the long-term madness table are going to potentially inhibit the party. Now, mind you, long-term madness is not permanent. It only lasts 1d10 times 1d10 hours, so it could be a long time, or it could be just a minimal amount of time. But some of these are very debilitating. For example, being if under the very unfortunate effect of falling unconscious, they're just screwed, But some of these your players can still work with. In Area 32, we have the Mirrored Cavern. When your players make their way through here, they'll be able to see a whole bunch of reflections, and as long as they're walking through here, that's not that big of a deal. But if they specifically get into a fight here with Tekeli Lee, then it's going to be a bit of an issue, because, they see all these reflections all around them. Think of it like a carnival attraction, wall of mirrors style. But what is very cool to note is that Tekeli Lee himself does not cast any reflections, so definitely that old school vampire style. In Area 33, we have the Watcher in the Walls. So when your players make their way through here, they'll be able to see a mummy that is dressed up in finer clothes. All they have to do is simply break a section of ice in order to get to it, at which point the mummy will go ahead and just start walking. It's going to walk all the way to the lost city of Ytheryn, and specifically it's going to the library, because presumably this mummy was a librarian of some kind. It's not going to interact with them, it's simply going to start walking. And this is a very good way to get your players to finally find the lost city of Ytheryn if they've been searching around this whole place and have been unsuccessful. They can just go ahead and find this thing, because if your players, uncover some creature and it just starts walking with a dedicated purpose, your players are probably going to be curious about what's going on, right? Now, we don't get any information on how to roleplay this mummy in particular. It does state on the mummy stat block that mummies can talk, but once again, we don't get any information on how to roleplay it. I personally would go ahead and have this thing not talk at all, and I would just go ahead and say that this thing was a librarian that would basically go ahead and find certain scrolls and find certain books and just do menial tasks and labors. The golden mask that this mummy wears is worth quite a lot, so if you have players that see undead kill undead, they'll be rewarded with a decent amount of gold, I guess. In Area 34, we have City Debris. In here, your players will be able to find some of the city's debris, and if anybody makes a history check and is able to discern it, they'll be able to see that the stone was not carved by physical means, it was carved by magic. In Area 35, we have the Mysterious Cube. On the floor in the middle of this 15-foot high cave is an 8-foot cube of smooth grayish green stone that is free of frost. So, if you just all of a sudden have one thing in this entire dungeon that isn't frost covered, you're obviously going to have people that are curious. If they go ahead and stick their hands on this thing, then they're screwed because they put their hand on a spitting mimic, which is pretty funny. Now, a spitting mimic is a new stat block, and my oh my is this thing fascinating and incredibly deadly. It does a decent amount of damage with the pseudopods, but the real kicker here is the spitting acid. This thing, on average, is basically a lightning bolt that can hit a lot of people. and it is pretty tremendous. And of course, during the whole time it's trying to get back its spit, it's going to go ahead and latch its pseudopods onto anybody it can, sticking them to its adhesive body and biting into them. Really fun stat block and a fun monster to play. Area 36, the Frozen Grove. Once your players make their way here, they'll be able to see an interesting sight. They'll be able to see trees that are still kicking somehow, even though they're not under the sun, and of course there is a ton of cold around here. And the reason for that is because there is a dryad tied to this place, and she is keeping this place up alive. The dryad's name is Halloween, and she is lonely, and she's going to go ahead and talk to anybody she can for as long as she can. In fact, she is so lonely to the point where if anybody tries to leave, she's going to go ahead and try and charm them magically to stay around because she is that bored and sad. The Dryad has a lot to talk about, and she can go ahead and tell the players a little bit about what's going on here, about how the Netherese magic binds the Dryad to the Grove, about the magical pairs that are here that actually confer some great bonuses, about how some Drow have been skulking around here recently, and also very important is strange one-eyed creatures lurk in the cave to the south right there, and your players can go ahead and discover what's going on there with the Nothics. Located on each tree is 3d6 ripe pears that Halloween will go ahead and say, yeah, you can go ahead and take them, just don't eat too many at once. And these pears are awesome. They each confer spells that you can go ahead and use one time before the magic vanishes. And, they're pretty useful. It could be as simple as, just a little vicious mockery spell, which is hilarious. But on a natural 20, you can go ahead and get a Charm of Restoration, which would be huge. If you have a ton of people that are going insane, they're jacked up mentally, they might be hungry, they could have a whole bunch of these terrible side effects. Getting a Charm of Restoration here would be massive. But here's the kicker. A creature that eats 3 or more purple pears within 1 hour is poisoned for 24 hours. And that is huge, right? 24 hours of being poisoned, that's going to put a player out of commission for a decent amount of time. So how do we roleplay as Halloween? Well, you should play her up as the text states. She probably is very lonely because no one comes around here. And the only people that have come around here recently are a vampire gnoll that she doesn't want to interact with, some drow she doesn't interact with, and of course, Nothics that she doesn't want to interact with. So she's going to latch on to the first humanoids that don't look totally evil. And, you should have her played up as not necessarily desperate, but you should definitely show her off as, oh yeah, tell me about what's going on, oh yeah, maybe, definitely have her try and keep the conversation going. Eventually, at some point, your players are going to want to bounce, but she'll be like, no, come on, stay, please. So you can have a ton of fun with that, and maybe if you have a druid in the party, maybe the druid can maybe promise to have the trees uprooted at some point and moved somewhere closer to civilization. In Area 37, we have Weird Insights. Your players go ahead and check this place out, whether they're just exploring or have been told by the Dryad about what's going on here, and they'll be able to see 4 Nothics. These Nothics are in fact denizens of Ytheryn, who have been driven insane by all the latent magic that's floating around here, and they have recently made their way out to here just to go ahead and explore around. If your players go ahead and offer them something in regards of, food and drink, then they can go ahead and get these Nothics talking. These Nothics have no memory of their lost humanity, and any information they might provide is garbled with bits of nonsense. Characters that make a DC 12 insight check can glean the following information after a brief conversation. Iriel Larthus is a Netherese archwizard, watches over Ytheryn. He has lost not only his mind, but most of his body as well. All that remains of him is his floating human skull. And all this information in this little blurb here. I'm going to go ahead and tell you though, I personally would not recommend giving away all this information. Because one, if you tell your players that there is a wizard whose skull is floating around here, you're going to give away that there's a demi-lich. New players aren't going to know that, but if you have semi-experienced players, they're probably going to know what's up. At the bare minimum, they're going to think it's a lich, right? Second, if you tell your players that there's giant floating hands of magical force that are wandering around the city, once again, experienced players are going to know that those are Bigby's hands, and that's going to detract from the shock and awe of a first encounter. The Ytheryn Mythalar won't function properly as long as the spindle, a powerful artifact dating back 40,000 years, remains in the city. The artifact is located within the city's central spire. If they don't remember anything about their previous lives, then how the frick do they know about this, first off? And secondly, once again, that's going to detract away from their first-hand knowledge. What happens when they finally get to the spindle, and they already know what it is? That takes away from the mystery of, finding something for the very first time. Now, the one thing in this list that I would recommend telling your players about is one must perform a ritual to enter Ytheryn's central spire. That one is interesting because the Nothics don't remember how the ritual works. The only thing is that your players will know that they have to perform some sort of ritual. And in Chapter 7, we'll be going all over that. Your players have to go around to all these locations and finally figure out how to perform this ritual. Giving your players a piece of the puzzle is interesting, but giving away the whole picture, I'm not really too much of a fan of that. And lastly, the most egregious of all of these is somewhere in Ytheryn is a scroll that can summon the Tarrasque. That is so not cool to tell your players. That is, without a doubt, why? Why would you do that? For my game in particular, when my players finally stumbled across the scroll of the Tarrasque, they had like a double and a triple take. I was like, yeah, you find the scroll and, oh yeah, you read it and, oh yeah, apparently it can summon a giant creature, a Tarrasque. And they're like, no, that's not true. And that was awesome. The fact that they didn't know what was coming, they just pull open the scroll and see what it does, that is awesome. So don't rob your game of a lot of the mystery involved here. Go ahead and leave the mystery for the game because that is fun. Now, is there some other things these Nothics could be saying? Absolutely. I think there's a lot of fun bits and pieces of information you can have these Nothics slip about the lost city of Ytheryn. But don't be too egregious with it. Don't give away a lot of the campaign. Make the lost city a mystery even as they're crawling around all of its awesome locations. Area 38, the ice caves, simply just a little throwaway off on the side here with nothing in particular. Area 39, the passage of Ytheryn. This is finally, after crawling their way through this dungeon, no matter which way they took, this is the one and true way to get to the lost city. Your players will head down a small little passageway for a full mile before they can finally arrive and see the city laid out in front of them. And there we go, finally, all 39 locations of this chapter. But while we've completed all of the locations, we still have this wrapping up scene. First off, we have Avarice follows. Guided by visions of Levistus, Avarice follows and brings her cult into the Caves of Hunger, slaying all the Elk Tribe warriors out in front, and follows the party into the lost city of Ytheryn. Of course, this can entirely change depending on who you have as an ally throughout the course of this campaign. It doesn't need to be Avarice, it could be any one of the Arcane Brotherhood members, or my most favorite, it could be all the Arcane Brotherhood members, and it could be even more foreign entities. Who knows, maybe there's a string of people that are constantly trickling their way through the Caves of Hunger, following the party to the Lost City. And once they arrive at the Lost City, then it's going to be a clown fiesta of factions going up against each other, trying to get everything that they can. But also important here is Tekeli Lee escapes. If your players did not kill Tekeli Lee, then he's just going to go ahead and wander off to the 10 towns and eventually going to be able to eat people. Because there is no way the city guard is going to be able to handle a vampire gnoll. They will not. He's way too strong. He's going to go ahead and just consume everything in his wake. And unfortunately, for whichever 10 town he comes across, there is going to be death. So this is the connecting chapter between the very end and, that awesome caper that we just had. And my oh my, is this a fun one. This is just a good old school dungeon romp where your players can interact with a lot of various monsters, get into a ton of fights, find some cool items, and make some friends and enemies along the way. I really like this chapter. I know some people don't like the hardcore aspect of this module, and specifically, here's looking at the Remorhaz that your players could actually stumble across. That is kind of egregious, but if you're running a meat grinder, then go ahead and run it as is. It works fine. The thing I really appreciate about this dungeon is the lack of linearity. Your players can go various different ways here and interact with a whole bunch of different creatures, but at the end of the day, they will finally arrive at the grove and be able to make their way to the end. So you don't have to plan out this entire area. If you know for a fact your group always hugs the left or always hugs the right or always charges down the center, then you don't have to prep everything. And also, if you have a group that is completionist, then you know you're going to be sitting here for a while and you don't have to worry about prepping for the future to come. It works out either way, and it's fantastic. So go ahead and tell me, how do you plan on running this chapter? Are you going to go ahead and have a guy to just charge all the way through and quickly make their way to the lost city of Ytheryn? Or are you just going to let your players be autonomous and do whatever the frick they want? Are you going to go ahead and nerf certain encounters because you don't like the deadly lethality of it? Or maybe you want this thing to be a super meat grinder and you maybe add some more stuff. Sky's the limit, really. What are you going to do with Tekeli Lee? Is Tekeli Lee going to attack the party every chance he can get? Like, as soon as he heals up, he's going to go ahead and charge against the party again? If you do that, then your party is definitely going to either, one, try and corner that guy, or two, they're going to go ahead and just try and rush right through. How are you going to handle the Drow? Are the Drow just simply going to attack the party? Or maybe you're going to allow for some negotiations? There's a lot of information that your players can glean from this location if they have someone that can exposition it all, specifically Professor Scant. But if your players don't have Professor Scant, then how are you going to give your players that information? Or do you not even give it to them at all? That is going to do it for me for this video, though. This was certainly a blast for me and my players, and most important of all, it just leads up into my most favorite chapter of this entire book, The Lost City of Ytheryn. In that chapter, we're going to be going over a lot of the faction play. We're going to be going over each individual building, because there is a lot to go over, mind you. And we will be diving into how to wrap up this campaign, because this campaign can end so many different ways depending on what your players do, and most important of all, what they don't do. So we'll be diving into all of that in future videos, though. Thank you all for watching, and the best way to go ahead and make sure that you watch those videos later on is go ahead and subscribe to me, because I've noticed only 30% of my viewers have subscribed. Oh, so sad. I want to bump those numbers up, up, up. That's going to do it for me, though. Thank you all for watching, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.